So we are live now. Hello there, this is Abhivardhan from Internationalism. So we launch the Indus Think, our first opinions podcast, completely dedicated to Indic views, all about Indian civilization, something about Indian polity, but in a very different way. We have this amazing episode, and in this first episode, we have Ruchir and Karthike with us. I think I would be more than happy to introduce. So Ruchir is a media critic, he's a policy analyst, while Mr. Karthike is a Martinian, a lawyer, and yeah, both of them are good friends of mine. So today we will be discussing about a very interesting topic which has emerged due to the incidents which are regarding information warfare and the way a particular set of people, or we say the Indian host culture, has been treated for a long time, which I would regard as decoloniality in Indian foreign policy. So before we go ahead, I think I should give a little brief about what it is and how should we go ahead with this. Now, decoloniality is a concept that came in from Latin America in terms of academics. However, decolonization has been happening for a long time, since 1945 and so forth. I mean, predominantly. After the Trusteeship Council of the UN became very much defunct, decoloniality became an idea which many scholars around the globe discuss. Americans discuss in their own way, whether north or south. Africans discuss their own way. The British also try to do, and even the Indians. So now, how is it connected with foreign policy? Is because yes, it defines our real politic. How are we concerned and connected with those countries who are, who have earlier colonized us, but now are good friends of us? So we will have two divergent views for sure, and I will be definitely giving my follow-ups. So let us begin and let's see how this discussion unravels. And I'm pretty sure that it would be amazing. So I'll start with both of our panelists. So either Ruchir or the Karthike may start as they wish to. So we know that Western civilization and the Asiatic states have their own aspects to it. And Asiatic states very much do not agree with what the Westerners think about ideas like liberty and freedom. So I think that also might apply to the idea of sovereignty and the way armed neutrality or security is seen. So if I may put this on the table, how would you like to explain that? How do Asian states generally develop and build up their own aspect of security and sovereignty? So anyone would go ahead.
Right. Should I take that, Karthike?
Yeah,
I
sure.
can begin and then you can take it on from there. So in the post-colonial era, as countries in Asia in particular gained sovereignty, as they gained their voice in international affairs, you saw a development of indigenous or revival of indigenous political philosophy in these countries. This can be in China, where they rediscovered them after trying to destroy them in the Cultural Revolution. But Deng Xiaoping, when he developed socialism with Chinese characteristics, it was a melding of Marxist-Leninist, Maoist, and Confucian political thought. Or more successfully, Singapore was at the forefront of what they called Asian values. So Lee Kuan Yew, the first founding prime minister of Singapore, he popularized this, among Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, throughout ASEAN, as it's called. And in 1993, the countries of Asia and the Pacific, they met in Bangkok for what was called the Bangkok Summit on Human Rights, where they, for the first time in a multilateral forum, pushed back against what they saw was the universalization of Western political philosophy and weaponization as a tool with which to interfere in other countries. So they said that according to Asian political philosophy and values, you first need to have sovereignty over a territory in order to enact and enforce laws and rights. So laws and rights don't exist in isolation. They don't exist in a vacuum. Otherwise, they're just, socially constructed. They're imaginary. They're only real when there's some sort of authority to enforce them. So they said that in our political philosophy, and this goes back to Indian philosophy as well, that you have Shukra Niti, you have Chanakya Niti, where they say that first you need to define sovereignty, that there is a territory free of external interference, and where the state has enough capacity to deliver rule of law at the grassroots. So they said, yes, we do believe in human rights and social rights and economic rights, but the condition for that is to have a state that's capable of enforcing them. Otherwise, you can't feed starving people with the concept of rights. It makes you feel good inside, but it doesn't lift you out of poverty. It doesn't give you dignity unless you have some sort of material security.
Yeah, I think I'll agree with that. That every state and every aspect, like we are culturally different and we have our own concerns and sensitivities. So of course, shared values cannot be equated to the Western form of or definition of democracy. We do not have to have a democracy to like to be good, or like we all know that there are certain principles that are bad, like nobody supports genocide and stuff like that, but you cannot implement your aspect of or your definition of things on other countries. And I think that recently when we see on social media and the new think tanks reporting about India's India's deterioration as far as democracy is concerned. But if we look into how international media has been covering India, you can see that for them it was always India always had a deteriorated democracy. It was never a good country with stable governance and good governance. It was always that. Now that we see that they have increased, so people are wondering why they are changing their opinion. They have never changed their opinion. Their opinion has been the same forever. And as far as the Asian values are concerned, and I think pretty like all the international relations and the courses have been reduced to the pros on counterinsurgencies, like international relations, wars, and we never actually get the aspect to define other international relations. For example, the human rights or the values which they are talking about. We never got the seat in the table to discuss the exact shape or the definition of that thing. So I think with the rise of Asian countries, for example, China and India, I don't see China and India as the same block. But considering the rise, we think it's about time that we get the seat in the table, and we should decide for ourselves what shared values and our concerns should be.
And if I could just add one point to that, it's very interesting to see that originally the concept of human rights and the Declaration of Human Rights at the UN was not pushed for by the West. It was pushed for by the Eastern Bloc and the non-aligned countries. So by Eastern Europe and then Latin America, Africa, Asia. But then with time, as these countries lost the ability, especially as the Eastern Bloc lost its ability to project power, Western countries were able to appropriate the concepts, redefine them in their own interests, and then weaponize them as a stick with which to beat countries that they feel are not servile enough to their interests.
Yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. I think there is also one model to it, and I'd like to add it. We know that Europe and Asia are different continents, but whenever we amalgamate them together as Eurasia, sometimes thinkers have noted in the past that Europeans generally think that they have this tendency that, okay, fine, there is something known as the Asiatic civilization. It may be Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Indian, and so on, because ASEAN is also very diverse now. What generally has been, I'm not saying it's a majoritarian notion, but kind of a very common notion every time that, and I'm just quoting it in a very colloquial way, they just think as if it's like, okay, we have one civilization which we had in the past. Let's, for the sake of modernity, leave it, and then come to something like, okay, fine, we are struggling to progress, but the thing is that history repeats itself, and you need to look at history. So I think that's something which is a very interesting and weird problem. Like I remember a very interesting statement by the permanent representative of India in New York, he recently commented on West Asia because he congratulated Israel and the Saudis for the Abraham Accords, and he very interestingly mentioned, now I am obviously adding Iran into it as well because we know how Iran is. He very interestingly stated that West Asia is a part of the civilizational heritage that we have been with, obviously the Parsis and so forth. So we know obviously that now this is not the case. Countries like Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and so forth have their own priorities and conflicts. So I think maybe we can say for now, I mean, we can obviously debate upon it that maybe the larger narrative or the larger idea that they share is that struggle is progress. Because what happens is that whenever, and this is completely my view, I may be wrong, I may be right, that's not an issue, that even if we see the history of how the idea of liberties has grown, there are always two approaches to it. First, either they quote the British approach of enlightenment, which stems from Martin Luther King to so on. Obviously, there has been a history before that as well. Either they choose the Rousseauian path, which is the French Revolution, the radical path, and so forth, the reign of terror, and then we go to communism. But anyways, so how do you see this amazing equation of, I would say, struggle is progress, as we say forth? Like, if we try to connect how something which started, and I'm more connecting it to the, how the idea of socialism also spread, because that also is a very important aspect. We usually saw in the Korean Peninsula, we saw it in China, we saw it in Russia. India also tried to implement it its own way. So what do you think of that? Yeah, and anyone can start.
No, I think Ruchir should take this.
Okay, then there's a lot to unpack in this question. First of all, I like that you brought up the supercontinent of Eurasia, because Europe is not a separate continent. It is a peninsula at the western end of Asia, of Eurasia, if you want to call it that. So this entire concept of the West or Europe having a distinct civilization is completely imaginary. Geographically, it's one entity. Linguistically, there are deep relations. These are Indo-European language groups and ethnicities over this this mega continent as well. So I would argue that there is not a distinct European civilization and a distinct Asian civilization. Europe is home to a distinct Hellenistic civilization, Romance civilization, Germanic civilization, Slavic civilization, and Asia is home to a Persian civilization, a Sanskritic civilization, Chinese civilization, and so forth. So this whole East versus West divide is just a imaginary construct that helps people to feel superior, that because we industrialized first, because we became economically advanced, it means our values are superior, our culture is superior, our religion is superior, and everyone else needs to be more like us in order to lift themselves out of poverty and ignorance. Now, that's a very colonial understanding of the world. And leaving aside political sovereignty, this is about cultural sovereignty, that people of distinct cultures have the right to define their culture, their values, their civilization for themselves, and to find their own path and set their own goals for the long-term well-being of their people, of their culture, of their civilization. So that's the first part. The second, about, let's say, the march of history over time. So from monarchy to liberalism, or some call it bourgeois democracy, to social democracy, and then to in the Marxist sense, history ends when you go from capitalism to communism. In Marxist-Leninist theory, you go from capitalism to socialism, which is the transition phase, and then communism is this wonderful ideal that someday you will reach. Then you don't need a dictatorship of the proletariat, you don't need a vanguard party, then society achieves the perfection that it had originally in village democracy. So with that, there's many different ways to look at history. That you can look at it as this linear path that goes from slavery to feudalism to capitalism to socialism to communism. You can look at it as cycles You can look at it as a zigzag. Sometimes you jump backwards in history as well. And in the case of many post-colonial countries, when they achieved independence, they found themselves with what was essentially a feudal society and economy. And the colonial power wanted it that way, and it keeps the country weak. It's a nice market to sell their finished goods. It's also a nice source of raw materials. Now, some countries tried to jump forward from feudalism to socialism without capitalism in between. But then, what are you redistributing? Socialism is about redistributing the means of production. There were no means of production. You were in a feudal society and economy. So, this is where Deng Xiaoping comes in again, where he said, in order to redistribute wealth, you need to let some people accumulate wealth in the first place. You need to have the state or people accelerate capital accumulation. You need to have productive forces. You need to have an industrial base. And then once you've done that, you can build a more just, economically fair society. And that's been the secret behind the last 40 years of China's success at lifting people out of poverty and being able to project itself now as a civilizational state, as a world power. That's something that not every other country has understood yet, especially with the Indian brand of what's called socialism, so Nehruvian or Fabian socialism, which was about painting a nice human face on feudalism without dismantling feudalism. You just want to make it, a bit more fair, a bit more just, a little bit of welfare here and there. But poverty is structural. It exists not because people are stupid, not because they have the wrong values or the wrong culture. It exists because there's barriers placed to people lifting themselves out of poverty. You have to dismantle those barriers, and you have to accelerate their upliftment by giving them the tools to do so themselves.
Yeah. Now, the question has addressed a few things, and what Ruchir said, I would like to add 2-3 things on that. So I'll answer. My answer will address the first and second part. As far as the division or the superiority of cultures are concerned, I think that has a lot to do with the approach of culture seen through the eyes of Abrahamic civilizations. For example, if we look into the Judeo-Christian history, you'll find details about Jews dehumanizing Babylonians, Assyrians, Egyptians, that they are, pagan, savage people, giving all sorts of, killing animals and doing all sorts of crazy things. And the same was did even in Islam. Prophet Muhammad is supposed to have ended the Dore Jahiliya, like the uncivilized period. He ended it by coming, and now he's treating them. So there's a sense of self-righteousness that we have morals, we are better than all other pagans, heathens. And when when Sir William Jones was actually working on the Indo-European languages, and he was suggesting that how Sanskrit is more refined than excuse me, Latin and Greek, people in Britain, thinkers were saying, oh, actually, it's not a coincidence. Alexander went there and he has taught them. So it's not like their language is superior. It's like they have learned it from us, from the West. So I think that's something historical and cultural. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just merely stating a fact that, and we have seen this even in the Viking invasions of Britain, like the heathens are coming and they are bad people, destroying stuff like that. And this has, to a certain extent, I think there is a common civilizational consciousness which gradually weakens, but it's always there. So this sense of superiority has been sanitized, but it's still very much present in cultures, in certain countries, that they are by far superior. Even though they talk about economic development and economic cooperation, it's not thing. You can easily see the sense of superiority when they say that. The biggest, we can see the international journalists and commentators commenting that the Indians are not listening to us. Now they are thinking for themselves and they are not capable. So that is something wrong, and that is how the democracy is deteriorating in India. Now coming back to China, like my views of China are quite staunch. Like I believe China, the modern China, to be an existential threat to us. It's not the West telling us, we know that. But there is something to be learned from China. After centuries of humiliation, they have learned something. Now they know the game. Like Ruchir said, that they have developed, they have created wealth, they have distributed wealth, they have brought people out of poverty. Now they are at the stage to actually be a part of the game. And I believe hypocrisy runs the world. Everybody is hypocrisy rules international relations. And China has learned the game that you have. Just imagine, considering the debate surrounding the Uyghurs genocide, Germany, EU has signed an investment treaty with China, and they don't have a problem with it. It was hushed during the lockdown. Nobody was talking about it. Rights violation because the economy is concerned, and their industries are heavy. Automobile industry is heavily dependent on China. So China has learned the game, and this is what India should learn from China. Don't be like that, but no, when you talk about civilization and dharmic and Bharat, it makes no sense if people in your country are dying of hunger, and if your human developed index is like medium or low or sub-Saharan level, nobody is going to listen to you. So I think that is the approach Indian policymakers should think of.
Great. So before going to the next point, since we definitely have discussed some bits about China, usually, and again, I'm just opinionating on it. What we generally see is that the some people argue that China is following its own civilizational path, that the way it has been collectivist and so forth. People say there are three values to it. I think legalism, Mahism, and the one I remember, which is Confucianism, which is obviously the values by the great Confucius. Now, but interestingly, what happens at a gradual level is that the way the Chinese premiers have been doing, the one who brought the economic boost despite the Tiananmen Square incident was Deng Xiaoping. And we see Xi Jinping's policies to be quite divergent when it comes to BRI and other things per se. Yes, that is, I think, an agreement of point that, okay, fine, yes, he's quite hasty and many things that he does. Still, but my point is that both India and China are quite deviated when it comes to civilizational virtues, or people say civilizational transigeance, or intransigence as we call it. So, how should India see it? Because one thing is for sure that we understand the nature that, okay, China is hasty. It tries to show its own understanding of international rules with its own so-called Xi Jinping characteristics, or I would say the Chinese characteristics, which are like, okay, if we said it, we said it. There is no X, no Y, no Z, no zero, no A. So how would you see it? How should we tackle it? How should we understand it? Because I think we have some understanding of the CCP's working, but sometimes also we deviate because often we assume that they might be a civilizational state. Although my opinion is that both of them are not right now because of their own reasons. But I would like to know, what do you think, both of you? Anyone gets that?
So, because of the connection, I was able to figure out your question, but I didn't listen it properly. But I can, as far as your question is concerned, you are basically saying how India should assert itself on the international level, right? Like how, as a state, it can assert itself. If I got it right, right?
Not what I meant to say was that China generally bends and makes its own aspect of international rules. It starts from IPR to anything, right? We know it already. It also tries to say, okay, fine, this is racism, this is not racism, this is genocide, this is not genocide. I'm just trying to give an analogy of it. So it's not just international rules, but the way the Chinese characteristics thing goes on. So what do you think about it? Like, what's your view? How should India tackle it? How should India see it? Not just at the international level, but for also of its public policy aspects.
So I will take some points from my previous answers that I said that there are certain there is a civilizational consciousness and attitude. So China always had this tributary system that, okay, we are the middle kingdom, we are the superior ones, and they have been the second or the first major super economic power throughout history. We were like, between India and China, we were always taking first and second position. So coming to that, of course, there's a difference in our civilization thinking that India has a different sets of culture or attitude towards realities, and China has like this one system, like there's not many diverse views, and there's this supremacy towards themselves. But China is dictating terms now because they are in a position to do so. You have to be in that position to actually dictate terms. What India has done talking about like after independence, our foreign office and Mr. Menon was all shouting at the UN about American imperialism and stuff like that, and said nothing when Soviet invaded Hungary. So what we said that we made certain bad choices. Now, like, okay, now we only have one thing to do, which is to make ourselves superior, economically superior, get better lifestyle for people of India, make long-term policy changes, and gradually we'll be in that position to dictate terms. For now, what we can do is actually to make a better PR of the government, because our government, no matter how people say they are fascist and dictator, I don't believe, because they suck at PR. They totally suck. I remember I was in England at that time when the CA protests were going on, and the way the international media was reporting was they were playing to the gallery, because Europe, genocide and citizenship and Nuremberg law, just you type that and the report will do its thing. So people came to me and they were like, Karthi, what's happening in your country? Like, are the Muslims being stripped of their citizenship? And I was like, no, but like nobody knew anything. Like, that is the level of hysteria international media does. And I always think that there are two ways the government work. One is the diplomatic level, which they can, and which the conversation they cannot have, they do that through international media and their stooges in the think tanks, and they set the narratives around the world. So, and we tried to do that. If we did that, recently that scandal happened where people said, okay, India was trying to do these things, and certain set of academics, I don't remember the exact term, where there was the big circle of PR was busted, that Indian government was trying to write things about themselves, and it busted. So clearly your PR suck. Everybody does that. Every country does that. So I think in order to dictate terms, two things: again, make your government more efficient and get your economy sorted. And that is how I think we'll be able to be in that position to actually say stuff. Otherwise we can crib about it. Nobody is going to take it seriously.
Yes. So, yes, Ruchir, what do you think? You can add something on it.
So yeah, I think it's important to realize, to build on what Karthikeya said, that even though there is, a small micro minority of elite Indians who, are equally comfortable in the West and in India, or more accurately, more comfortable in the West than in India, and then act as the native interlocutors, at the macro level, India's per capita income adjusted for purchasing power is the same as Mauritania in West Africa, and with that level of economic, let's say, power, it's very difficult to act like some sort of moral force in geopolitics. That think that non-alignment is great. Panchsheel is also great. Like, the actual principles of non-alignment, the actual principles of Panchsheel are fantastic. The problem is, in foreign policy, traditionally, India has felt that talking about these principles is enough, and you have some great moral authority, and people are going to listen. But no one is interested in listening to a country that can't feed its people, that can't give them a roof over their head, that can't give them running water and electricity. Then you come off as a joke. And then no one takes you seriously. If Menon gives a 12-hour speech at the UN, no one remembers the content. They're just like, oh, this wacky Indian guy came like a snake charmer and bored everyone. So, with that in mind, you have to understand that all of this soft power is not, created out of nothing. It's a function of your hard power. You have to collect and accumulate economic and geopolitical power, like China did. or in the past, like the Soviet Union did, that after their revolution, they were in quite a bad state. But and then after the Second World War, they lost 25 million people in that war. But they were still able to accumulate geopolitical and economic power so that the world took them seriously. They didn't agree with the political ideology. They saw the country as an existential threat. But what are you going to do about it? It's big, it's strong, and it's influential. That's basically the rule of geopolitics. In geopolitics, there is anarchy until someone makes the rules for themselves. And after World War II, the winning powers made the rules for themselves. That's the Americans, the USA, the USSR, now Russia, Britain, France, and China. And the entire system is designed to maintain that post-war status quo because they benefit from it. That some countries are rich, powerful, and stable because other countries are kept weak, poor, and unstable. And anyone who tries to change that, and that could be India, it could be Brazil, it could be Indonesia, it could be China today, where they stopped, being good boys and started making their own rules. That's seen as a threat to that system. And in any sort of self-interest, you don't, if you're benefiting from a system, you will defend it. You don't want to share power. You don't want to have some new player come and say, I want a seat at the table. You're not listening to me. The rules have to change. Then you're like, who is this? Who do they think they are? The system's working so well for us. Why can't you shut up like you did before? And that's, what they're doing today. They do it with any country that tries to challenge the established order. They did it to Libya. They did it to Iran. They did it to Venezuela. They did it to Russia. They're trying to do it with China, but it's too late. They realize too late. Now China's too strong and resilient. And they're doing it to India. And very successfully, because we're not resilient, we're not defensive. We are very cosmopolitan. We think that, when the West comes with its lessons and its lectures, it's because they really care for us and want to lift us up to their level and roll the red carpet and give us a seat on the UN Security Council. They don't want to do that. Why would they? What do they gain by doing that? So there's no morality or good intentions in geopolitics. There's only power and interests.
That's exactly right. And the other thing which I would like to discuss, I just want to add is, I don't know why we always fail to get the message. Not they are clearly giving a message through their international media and think tanks that how much contempt they have for us, and still we fail to understand that nobody's going to help you. Nobody's helping you. Like the level of reporting they do regarding climate change and how India is responsible, when we can see that in the Paris Agreement among the major economies, India is the only one who is actually getting the goals done, achieving the goals. And we can never forget the NYT cartoon where the elephant India is stopping the Paris Agreement train. And it was not only bad, it's just false. It turned out to be false. Same they did with the COVID thing. When the COVID, at that time in March, April, when everybody was afraid, what they were doing is millions will die in India. And all these things, if you add it up, they just leave a very bad taste in the mouth. And still we don't understand that what is this. And that is where I feel really, really depressed that we can't get our opinions or our approach right.
That's very intriguing. To add something, I have also very few instances. So when this Article 370 thing happened, when Article 370 was diluted by the government of India, obviously through executive orders of the president and so forth, the parliamentary procedure as it was, there was an interview by interview of a particular fellow member of the BJP, which was taken by journalist Tim Sebastian. Now, the interesting part is that if you see it at least 2 to 3 times in a very close way, obviously you will get one indication that, yes, we do not care about you. You have to respond to us. There are some issues which we will not be able to understand because we don't care about it. I think that's exactly how the international media does. like Karthikeya pointed out about that cow cartoon, I would like to also mention about one interesting cartoon, which obviously interesting in the sense that obviously it was not good, but still. The cartoon was when India successfully did its Mars mission. It was like some kind of a hut, or I don't know what, some building, and they were like showing that somebody's on a, wearing a typical rural outfit and with a cow and saying, okay, I'm knocking the door, please let me in, just because I have done the Mars thing, let me in. So I remember a very joking meme which was being shared for some time by some people, that when it comes to India's humility, there is some humility obviously among the people. That is exactly how you represent soft power. But the joke was that, okay, there was some foreigner who was coming in that movie and saying, oh no, poor hungry India, and all that stuff. Then okay, I want to see only oppressed people in that my sense, and I only want to see poor people in that sense. I mean, we also see it in some OTT shows as well, but I'm not getting into that at all. So I think we have very interestingly delved upon how India as a superpower should understand, or whatever we say, minor power as it is. So let us a little bit discuss about the role of India in various institutions. Now we have this big jargon that, okay, in Quad we are going to do something big. Some people spread this narrative that even if Trump comes back or does not come back, we don't know who's going to come next. We don't know. Even the Democrats don't have a very certain future, to be fair enough, because very simple reasons. Because nobody vouched for Kamala Harris, they vouched for Biden particularly. But now the funniest thing is that, okay, we understand that this is still kind of an America-centric order. It's partially multipolar, partially America-centric still, because we should not forget how Henry Kissinger made its relations between the US and China to counter the Soviets. Now, and this is now a question to both of you. How do you see the role of India in various institutions? Not just, what is just one example? We can take the UN, we can take SCO, we can take many. How do you see it? So anybody can start, and then maybe I could have a follow-up.
So if you look at the past 4 years, since Trump won the 2016 election with America First in the US and began to withdraw from international commitments, and that includes not just the Paris Climate Agreement, but also UNESCO, also cutting funding to the UN and WHO, that created a power vacuum in global governance institutions in the UN system. And there was only one country that was smart enough, fast enough, and cunning enough to take advantage of that, and that was China. So China saw this as a wonderful opportunity to place its own bureaucrats, its own diplomats, its own party members and assets into leadership positions throughout the UN system. And that's it's excellent. That's brilliant geopolitics. They have now established themselves as, we're not a rogue state. Look, when the other superpower, when that rogue state decided it didn't care about global governance, who stepped in as the benevolent and sympathetic power? It was China. And now we're shepherding the UN and the wider global governance system to a more fair, Asia-centric, multipolar reality. That's something where India could have, should have, and in the future will try to compete. But at the moment, 4 years ago when this happened, I don't think we had the strategic vision needed to take advantage of that withdrawal from the US, nor do we have the, let's say, the strategic depth. We don't have a strong diplomatic corps. Our Indian Foreign Service is woefully understaffed, underfunded. So it's not designed to project power. It's designed to represent our interests, not even defend our interests, represent our interests. And you can see that with the way that it even responds to criticism or to interference in our sovereignty. It's always on the back foot. It's always like, no, don't say that. Here's the reality. That's not enough. You have to, not be passive, not reactive. You have to be proactive. You have to be planting your people wherever you can. You need to be pushing them wherever you can, pushing your messages wherever you can. Western countries, in their form of modern liberal democracy, have legalized corruption and called it lobbying. Every country, pays for a lobbyist in London and in Washington, D.C. That is, the cost of being a modern nation state. I don't care how much it costs. You have to do it. If you're a serious power, you have to do it. And the government can make money for this, out of thin air, and they should, because even tiny countries like Armenia, even tiny countries like Greece, have lobbyists in Washington, D.C. who push their messages in to the the agendas of the members of the legislature there, members of the executive there, and to the wider press, and get their messages heard where it matters. Now, even our Western neighbor Pakistan, despite its economic crises, despite being heavily indebted and facing all sorts of domestic crises, has the money to cultivate those sorts of assets, and more importantly, the willpower. And that's what we're lacking. We have the money, we don't have the willpower, we don't have the strategic vision. This is the reality of the game. You have to learn to play it. You can't just complain all the time that the rules are unfair, like we used to. To take an example from cricket, when one-day internationals were invented, when the Cricket World Cup started in 1975, the second one in 1979, Indians kept complaining because they weren't good at it, that, oh, this is not real cricket. Test cricket is real cricket. It doesn't matter if we lose at the World Cup. It's not the real World Cup. Sunil Gavaskar made 36 runs, batting, for 60 overs, just as a protest against team policy, because that's how seriously they took it. Then in 1983, when by literally a miracle we won the Cricket World Cup, suddenly, like, oh, okay, actually ODIs are great, because now we figured out how to play the game. Now we figured out how to project our strengths in it. So yes, this is where we're going to focus. Same thing, you need that aha moment. You need something to click to understand that the rules will never be changed just because they don't suit you. You have to adapt to the rules. You have to learn to play the game. And once you do, look at how we have come to dominate not just the sporting arena in cricket, but also the administration of cricket. That the ICC has been forced to change in so many ways because of the strength of the BCCI. Same policy with the IFS.
Actually, I agree with that, and I was going to use the BCCI analogy, and you did already. That's amazing. I agree, and I think that's the worst. See, everything is so interrelated that I will have to bring the civil service exam into it some way. So I have spoken to so many people, like, who are preparing for the civil service or whatever. I think not more than 5 to 6% people I met have actually IFS in their goal. What they aim for is IIAS, which is the last remnants of the colonial Babuism we have, where you have like a big house and servants around you doing all sorts of proper feudalism, which was perpetuated in our country through government policies. And people choose IFS because they could not get into IAS. So when they become IFS, their main aim is to become ambassador somewhere without doing anything. They go to learn language in Paris for a year and they roam around Europe, not studying a language. And then they come back and then they are in South Block sitting in some division, doing nothing, just wasting their time. I'm not saying that the foreign policy doesn't work. It's not working the way it should work. Even compare Singapore. Their diplomatic corps is larger than India's, and we want to dominate this world. Like it's laughable to me. And this is the problem. Like even in the WTO, the China has learned the game. As I said, they know they don't need to occupy positions or leave the position. They just need to send their people around. And exactly as the lobbying that they are doing, they are even now getting into the primary universities in the UK, like the Oxford and the Cambridge, and they are occupying it. And that is something we should learn from China, and every country does that. Even as Ruchir said, Pakistan, we can't even compare with Pakistan. We remember the Balakot strikes and how Foreign Policy and all these magazines were publishing articles that were busted later, but they did their work. Like, for example, the F-16 missing thing, which was busted after a week, that report was not accurate, but nobody read that. Everybody read that the F-16 were not missing. So that is something which we always lose. We never think about it.
And
Yeah.
just to add a very quick point, people complain that it costs money to hire a lobbying firm in DC or in London. Yes, everything costs money. Not acting also costs money in the long run. It costs a lot more than that. It costs lives. It costs causes a huge amount of political, economic disruption. So it's a very small investment for a very important payoff in your own resilience and sovereignty.
That's really interesting. I have some points to add, so I'll actually take some examples now. As we were discussing about it, usually I have seen this among diplomats and leaders when it comes to global affairs, that okay, we try to show that okay, fine, we are this benevolent country which is very open to give vaccines and very open to help people in the need, whatever. Like, obviously India has done a lot to Palestinians as well, but obviously we are always termed as some kind of fascist state. But again, there are no parameters, there is no basis, but people do it. Other aspect which I have also seen is that why we don't have a strategic vision is because of the way we treat the notions of power and competence. So what happens is that okay, you need some blocks of power, but I sometimes believe, because we know that every foreign policy has to develop with some domestic intent. If you don't have any domestic intent, you don't have any domestic resources, you will not be able to grow. So I think like non-aligned movement, for example, as Ruchir mentioned, is an amazing idea. I think it was an idea which used to work for some time, or maybe how it was, until the Sino-Indo War. And then we realized, okay, fine, now it does not work out. In 1971, we forged some relationship with the Soviets again under Indira Gandhi, and then we realized, okay, fine, now there is something to do when it comes to alliances. And I think that is why now under S. Jaishankar and Prime Minister Modi, we have thought, okay, fine, let's have Quad, let's incentivize it much. In fact, even under the UPA, we try to do. But anyways, so my questions are in three forms, and I will be asking them because I think this is a very important point. And I'm going to do it one by one so that we can discuss it in a very interesting manner. The first one which I have is about the way administrations work. Now, I'm not particularly pointing to the way the Prime Minister works, or I'm not particularly pointing to any minister. I'm just talking about the trend and the work ethic, because what happens usually is that, okay, you want to assert yourself as a secular state, that is a different thing altogether, or whatever you say, socialist state, because I think that suits Indian narrative for some time in that way, the way we try to show it. But practically, how will it be? That's a different question. Like the way we do with Iran. But we know the Chabahar port issue, which always goes up and down, has been for years to go, as people have noted. We already know the Chabahar port issue. But always we say, okay, fine, we have a commitment. So one question will be that, okay, fine, how do we deal with, the ethos of understanding as who we are and how should we do as government? Because most of the time what happens is that, and let me be very honest, I'm also commenting a little bit about the Niti Aayog particularly, because what happens is that they just publish white papers, but when it comes to practical planning, they fail because, again, it's just hogwash. Like, even I can take one example and it proves it. In data protection policy, India has an obsession to copy from the great holy GDPR. I think as if there's no other law left in the world, sab khatam, everything is from GDPR. So वहीं से 13 to 17 copy कर लो, PDPP में डाल दो. The bill is still pending in the parliament. I don't know when it will be passed. Some people are saying August, some people are saying March. I don't know. So that's one. Second and third, I'm doing it fast so that we get to the pointers deeply. Second one is like, okay, let's say that, okay, fine, now we are trying to spread ourselves up. We are trying to help countries. We are trying to show that, we are a very nice country. I agree on the point very well that, like you very well classify, and this is to Ruchir, that you very well classify countries into rogue states, future client state, and client states. Even if we say that India is kind of a client state, particularly, or it is not, it depends. Even if we say that we take the narrative that, okay, we want to do some good, as we always say, how should we balance this over obsession with distributionism? Like, we want to give a lot, but at the cost of the Indian people. So that's the second one. But third one I'll do when we cover these two. So any of you can begin, because then it will be too long. So let's start with the first two now. Yeah.
All right. So since you mentioned me, I'll start and then pass it on to Karthike. The issue with us not having a strategic vision is that we never established one upon independence. Every other country, when they won independence, or more accurately, they took independence by force, had some sort of national mythos and great goal that was established. And that includes Pakistan and Bangladesh. They have no delusions as to what they are. They know what they are. They're a garrison state. They're the new Medina. This is temporary exile, and eventually they'll take over the whole subcontinent. Very clear. They're running 1,000-year jihad. They'll bleed India by 1,000 cuts. There is total policy consensus on the left, or what's the 5 people left on the left in Pakistan, the center and the right in these countries. So there's complete domestic policy consensus on what their foreign policy should be. Same with Bangladesh. Same with Sri Lanka. They know very well what they are. They're Sinhala Buddhist state. Their duty is to uphold Buddha Dharma. It's in Article 9 of their constitution, Buddha Dharma, Buddha Shasan. So we did not do that. After independence, we created a completely false myth that out of secular India, as a punishment for our own faults, Pakistan and Bangladesh, or East and West Pakistan, were carved out of us, and we're the successor state. No, British India was divided into a Muslim homeland and a Hindu homeland. That is something that is foundational to your identity as a civilizational state. That is how we were given independence. We didn't fight for it. We didn't take it by force. It was given to us through this division. But we have chosen to forget all about this and create some sort of new pacifistic mythos that, we won independence because of the great moral force of our nonviolence, and hence our foreign policy should also be about pacifism and nonviolence. Nehru said that after independence, we don't really need an army. We're a pacifist state. All we need is a police. And then went around talking about Panchsheel. So, Panchsheel, are great principles, in fact. So Panchsheels from the agreement with China and India are: 1, mutual respect for each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. 2, mutual non-aggression. 3, mutual non-interference in each other's internal affairs. 4, equality and mutual benefit. And 5, peaceful coexistence. Now, China put this in the preamble of their constitution, and now they have the entire state apparatus upholding this. The principles that we invented. We were happy to talk about it and never project any force to protect these principles. Panchsheel is also the founding ideology of Indonesia, who kicked out the Dutch by force and developed a strong national identity. They have many languages. They have many religious identities. They span wider than the entire continental United States. They invented a new language, Bahasa Indonesia, to integrate the country. They invented a new national dress, a new national identity. We didn't do that. We just inherited the feudal relations between a weak central government and then various rajas, in the regional satraps, and we called it federalism, and we called it center-state relations. Now, how in such a weak polity do you build consensus on foreign policy? Like, look at Western states. Over there, all Western states have the same foreign policy, whether it's a left-wing government or a right-wing government, and that is keep poor countries poor, keep them desperate and dependent, so that you can use them as a source of cheap labor and cheap raw materials and a market for finished goods. And why is this consensus so strong? Because the right-wing parties in these governments, in these countries, are funded by lobbyists from the industrial sector. The left-wing parties are owned by the trade unions of the employees in those industrial companies. So, of course, they have the same interests. Now, in India, we don't have a civilizational vision. We don't have a clear set of objectives. We have 29 states pulling in different directions, and then a weak central government holding the leash and just renting their loyalty. Oh, here, take some money, take some privileges, do what you want in the state, just keep it stable. So this status quo, just spending all of our state energy, all of our budget on maintaining the status quo, is not good enough, because you cannot maintain the status quo forever. Eventually, it will collapse. Either you accelerate that collapse and build something of your own, or you delude yourself. The collapse happens and it goes out of control. That's the long-term problem. And the status quo also is not acceptable, because the status quo doesn't work for everyone at the moment. If 1.3 billion people, so that's our population right now, 99% of them live on less than $30 a day. That's not acceptable. That's not worth preserving. It has to change. It must change. It will change.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And as you were talking about the existent theory that Pakistan and Bangladesh have their existence sorted, and we have this delusion, like we do not acknowledge our history. And I agree with that, that if you do not acknowledge your history, you can never have a future and no present as well. And people I see in India not being realist and talking about some peaceful agreement with Pakistan and Bangladesh in the future. And I want peace. Nobody wants to fight a war all the time. But considering the theory of the existence of Pakistan is very clear. Their legitimacy depends on that we cannot survive with India. We cannot have friendly relation with India. Why will a country destroy its legitimacy by, having a peace agreement forever? It is not going to last. But we live in these sorts of delusion. And considering the image after independence, we had this glorified image that India is a peaceful country and all vegetarians, yoga, and the yoga tea image of India. and considering that, it was totally injustice to our history. If you read our history, it's full of resilience for for everybody. No society does a Ashwamedh Yagya to occupy lands if they are peaceful. Nobody is peaceful, but this myth was inculcated in our minds that we cannot assert ourselves. And I think people coming in the government, be it bureaucrats or whatever, they are coming from a society which has been living in this reality for a long time. Socialism and all these points, just by definition, have been are deep rooted in our minds, that capitalist people are bad, industrialists are going to rob you off. Even though your country is dying, nobody has any wealth to distribute, but we are going to demonize the wealth creators. This is on domestic front. And of course, because we don't have our priorities sorted, we'll never have a realist international relations policy. We are thinking about Quad now, because now we think like, okay, Quad is a strategic objective now. But we never thought China will be a threat. That was something wrong on our part. That why were we not thinking about it before? Why should America come when they see that China is rising? Now we need some people there to that we already have a policy in place or a plan. If there is no Quad, what will we do? What is our plan? And we talk about, if you hear any diplomat or Indian foreign policy people, they talk about strategic autonomy and stuff like that. But you cannot have strategic autonomy when you don't have your priorities sorted or your attitude right. So that is what I have to say in this regard.
That's really intriguing because if we take the Quad, because I think we should a little bit, we know what is Indo-Pacific, and what happens is that countries develop their own vision of the Indo-Pacific. Now, I have for the most of the time seen, and again, my opinion, I may be right, I may be wrong, that and I think which is where I concur with both of you on this point, that if you are not showing your strength in the best way possible, like China does, Russia tries to show it in its own way, then how are you going to take it up? Because then what happens is that, okay, fine, you want to have many Indo-Pacific strategies, British strategy, American strategy, I don't know, Argentinian strategy, who knows? You have Solomon Islands as a strategy, every country, Sri Lankan strategy, Indian strategy. But the biggest issue is, does anybody read about the Cholas, or does anybody read about, okay, fine, how these countries develop their understandings, how these countries have their visions? Because what happens is that information warfare is a big issue. So what it does is that, okay, you have soft power, you have hard power, these two are different. We understand for centuries. There has been, obviously, when you do espionage and some other stuff like that, you try to mix and merge them. That is how history has been so far. In America, that is how surveillance states were made. But what happens is that, and I think we should blame social media for it a bit, that what happens is that due to social media and all these so-called disruptive technologies, I mostly call them Americanized disruptive tech, because most of them are from the holy United States. What happens is that info warfare generally mixes the very original and sane components of soft and hard power. So what happens is, okay, fine, now you're going to militarize everything, you're going to make everything a conflict aspect, and then somehow you lose your basis. So definitely, if your hard power aspects are not developed, you are not clear with your strategy, this merge and mix will always happen. I think it has happened with any high-end state in the past. I think we can take to reference of what Ian Morris used to say. But I think, so let's move on to the third point. And I think now we should a little bit discuss about the great USA. And why I think we should is because under the Nehruvian and Indira Gandhi era, we used to have a great obsession with the French and the British. British were like, okay, fine, but the Europeans. Americans were like, अच्छा ठीक है, दूर ही रहते हैं, अभी तो we consider you imperialist. और Soviet का है कि ठीक है भैया, we like you because okay, fine, we have some ideological aspects and so forth. So naturally, now we are saying that, okay, fine, and we must credit some leaders in the US who really thought at an institutional level to have an Indo-Pacific vision, because I don't think so that Antony Blinken does not have it or Joe Biden does not have it. They have it. But let's see how they can maintain their institutional credibility. It is an institution, of course, but again, as I said, information warfare problem. So when it comes to France and Indo-Pacific, we are very clear. Okay, France has a vision in Indo-Pacific, whether it is Macron, Le Pen, or somebody from the left, no problem. We have a vision. We are clear with it. With the Americans, since we know that it's an America-centric global order, the problem is that we usually fail to have a good calibration. So, the funniest part was then when Mike Pompeo, S. Jaishankar, Yoshihide Suga, and somebody from Australia, I don't remember, when they met, in their statements of consensus, what they had taken up, there were some pointers which they were like, okay, fine, we have an ASEAN-centric quad. Amazing. We know that ASEAN is not that much powerful in terms of hard power. It's just a delusion. Either it will be like Japan or Australia will be doing something for the USA, because my partial understanding is that obviously they are democracies, but considering their military and naval capabilities, they are like, okay, fine, we're kind of satellite states for the US. I'm not saying they are, but just in some partial sense. For India, I feel deluded or confused, but still we hope that we have something in 5 to 10 years, because I don't see Quad as an Asian NATO. So my simple question was like, okay, fine. We have all these approaches. We have something with France. We have something with Germany. How should we deal with the United States? So in one of my podcast episodes, one person said that it is the US which needs India the most. It is their view, not mine. and not vice versa. So how do you see it? And I'm not just talking about the Quad, but I'm in general talking about the Indo-US ties. So anyone may begin as they wish to.
So, Karthikeya, would you like to?
I don't have a lot of expertise on this issue, but I can just say that I used to consider US and India as institutionalized change will always remain the same. Strategic objectives might change. For example, because we see China being a threat, so people are emphasizing on Quad. It might change to something else later because these are things that are very vibrant and they change. They're not stagnant policies. So that I used to think. But considering the lobbyists, I am increasingly there are people in the administration which are using your domestic policies to arm twist into getting their international strategic objectives done. Maybe they are not directly doing it with India, but I think that will be the plan sooner or later. And we can see that the staff of Biden, where they have like proper proper Kashmiri separatists being on high ranking officials and people threaten India because of their domestic actions. And these are Indian Americans I'm talking about. So this is what actually concerns me a lot. Like even though they talk that okay, this is not going to change stuff, of course it might not materialize into arm twist diplomacy, but it creates a very bad relation. It worsens our relation because we know that they are allowing these things to happen even for domestic things. It changed the perception. So I think if we are looking for a long term policy which is free of all these things, it is not going to happen if they continue doing this thing because it is going to sour our relation. Because we don't see people in India demonizing Trump or other domestic policies. Of course we that will be like punching above the weight, but still we don't do that. But in America they are involved in everything what we do. For example, in the UK has very less influence now as far as international relations in Indo-Pacific is concerned. But still, if now we see that they are going to discuss the farm laws of the Indian farm laws in the British Parliament, which I can understand that they have their own electoral goals there because of the diaspora. But these are the things which are going to spoil the relation in the long term. So that is what I have to say as far as long term foreign policy is concerned. Unless they stop interfering in the domestic affairs of India and using and playing the petty politics, we can get along well. Otherwise, I don't see that happening for a long term.
Right. And so to add to that and to answer Abhivardhan's questions, it's very difficult for India to develop a close relationship with the US on the lines of what Japan enjoys or Korea enjoys, because they have given up sovereignty in exchange for American protection. And they are seen as reliable and loyal client states who deliver what is asked of them. To a certain extent, Pakistan or Saudi Arabia are also seen that way. Now, India, because of its internal fragmentation, because of its messy form of parliamentary democracy, is not seen as a reliable partner. It's too big, it's too poor, it's too chaotic politically to be seen as a reliable client state. And as we mentioned earlier, superpowers don't have friends. They see the world as client states, future client states, and rogue states. India is not a client state. It could be a future client state, but there are people within India who are willing to make that choice. But the US does not want a chaotic, poor, large client state that's it doesn't have a single entry where you put in a request, do this, and it gets done. That's why they love dictatorships so much. There's no such thing as shared values. There's who does our dirty work for us. Yeah, and dictatorships get the job done. And then there's rogue states. So rogue states are like Iran, Venezuela, China, Russia, where not, in terms of international relations, we're not a rogue state. But there is a large enough constituency of American policymakers who see us with that same lens. And they have seen us for 70 years like that, oh, this is troublesome country that keeps interfering with our objectives by bringing this morality into it. But they have an army of 1 million people, so they have some disruptive power. They're not a superpower, but they're a regional power. Now, as a result, the best case scenario of a partnership with the US is a strategic partnership where they use us as a buffer state against China, where we put our troops on the line, we put our navy on the line to patrol the border, to patrol the South China Sea, so that they have less of a burden. That NATO countries, or Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and Korea, and that's a political choice that our government needs to make, whether they want to play that game in the short term. But in the long run, it's not in the US's interest that India becomes more than a regional power. That if we rise, so let's say in the next 20 years, our GDP per capita adjusted for PPP, it goes up to, let's say, Iran's level or Malaysian levels, and we have a huge domestic market of 1.5 billion people, then we're no longer a strategic partner. Then we're a strategic threat, because now we're going to start making demands like China. We'll say, oh, we want our space in the UN, we want our guy in this position, the system is unfair, the world has changed. And why would the superpower want to go from a unipolar / bipolar model to a multipolar one with this new challenger? So then what would they do? Then they would do what they've always done to countries that tried to get above their designated place. And they would weaponize internal fragmentation. They would seek to balkanize the country. And the historical example here is what they did in Yugoslavia. It is what they did in the Soviet Union. And that is a huge risk for us in the next few decades, because the country is primed for that. It's very clear that we don't have the defensive capacities in information warfare to prevent the inflow of foreign money, foreign ideologies, and even foreign arms. So neutralizing that sort of separatism is really hard. And once the genie gets out of the bottle, it's almost impossible to stop. And it doesn't happen. So separatism never happens organically within a country. It happens with the blessing of a more powerful state, always. So that is something we have to keep in mind, that in the long run, it's not in the interest of the US to have a strong India, let alone a superpower. Even as an Asian power, it's then we stop being useful and we start being annoying. So the key here, the key challenge, is to maintain some sort of strategic autonomy, as Dr. Jaishankar says, some sort of new non-alignment. Because if there's this new Cold War between the US and China this time, let's do non-alignment or neutrality, but not with the old model of just thinking that begging for peace results in peace, but with a realpolitik understanding that peace is created by inflicting costs on violence. That can be domestically, that can be internationally. And the best neutral states are armed neutral states, like Switzerland, Sweden, Austria, who are willing and able to defend their sovereignty and by extension their neutrality. They can't be pulled into wars as combatants or as allies. That's something that we should consider. And we also need to be more creative in our peace building efforts. That if we have the huge risk of a two-front war with Pakistan on the western border and with China on the eastern border, what's the structural cause here? The structural cause is Pakistan has a foundational ideology that is bent on wiping out India. With China, it's a bit different. It's not that they hate us because of historical reasons. They feel that India has inherited the territorial and border ambitions of the British Raj, which China never recognized. So the issue is that our Indo-Tibet border became the Indo-China border. And then China is now projecting its understanding of how the borders should be. A creative solution to that is to stop having an India-China border and escalate tensions with China, show that you're willing to inflict costs on skirmishes until they are brought to the negotiating table, so that you can achieve détente with them. So in the Cold War, détente was very important between the US and the Soviet Union. It led to East and West Germany recognizing each other. But most importantly, one of the most creative foreign policy solutions of the Cold War was Austria. So Austria, after World War II, was divided just like Germany was between the four powers. The capital city, Vienna, was divided between the four powers. In 1954, the Soviet Union presented a proposal saying that Austria will be given its sovereignty back as a fully independent nation, but its constitution has to guarantee that it will be neutral on the lines of Switzerland and not allow any military alliances or military transport of any other country within it. That is the model we should use for Tibet. If you can bring China to the negotiating table with a willingness to play the game of hard power, that is an elegant solution that solves one hot border. The other hot border is almost impossible to solve without another war, and we have to keep in mind that their nuclear arsenal is not, for retaliation. They made them first. They don't have a no first use policy. If India reaches a certain level of economic or geopolitical power, Pakistan's nuclear arsenal is designed to be used to bring us back to their level. So you have to preempt that and build a foreign policy that has in mind that this is inevitable. At some point, those weapons will be used. So build bunkers, prepare yourself for it, and demonstrate that there are massive consequences to that sort of escalation.
Great. So since we have escalated into the pointers of how to deal with, let us get a little bit about the other actors in info warfare. So I am now shifting the last aspect of this discussion to obviously a little bit deeper on the information warfare problem, containing one of two examples, and obviously about a fraternity of people we know. Now, what I wish to discuss now is, okay, fine. My first point will be how do, and this is again out of the context, in a good context, because I think people are weaponized when it comes to, I can take the simplest example of Vietnamese or the Chinese and so forth. So my concern is with the NRIs across the globe. And the question isn't because what I've seen in a very general trend is that various NRIs go across, they they establish themselves. After they establish themselves, obviously a good deal of them have a good connectivity with the Indic values that obviously they had. But a very interesting faction of them doesn't. And I see that a very weird trend in the United States because of the narrative factions and so forth, because we can take people, and I don't wish to name either of them. The second thing is I would like to discuss about the recent so-called toolkit case, in the sense like how the MEA has responded, because I know that Ruchir had some sort of congratulations, but not that much, obviously. So, but yeah, so let us understand both of them, because I think the issue of Indian NRIs also is very important, how we communicate with the people. Yes, the government has to do with it, of course, but that's what Prime Minister Modi tried to do in the 2014 to 19 tenure. He used to travel all around the world, from Switzerland to whatnot, and then try to connect. But now it depends how they do particularly, but still, that's one example. So let's discuss this. Let's first discuss the Indian NRI perspective, how they see forth. Again, obviously, I know that it can go haywire in the way possible, but let's see. So anybody can start accordingly.
So are you going to go ahead. Go ahead. All right.
So I was just going to make a simple point. and that is the Indian diaspora in the US in particular is quite unique in terms of diasporas. In other countries, the diaspora of the homeland often becomes more nationalistic when they're in the host country. If you look at the Turkish community of Germany, they are more supportive of Erdogan. They are more Islamist in character. They are more Turkish nationalist than the ones in Turkey itself. Similarly, you have Moroccans in the Netherlands. You have Albanians in Switzerland or Serbs and Croats. And they're all very proud of their homeland. And in fact, it's seen as problematic, that it's seen as a failure of integration in the host countries, that, oh, why are these second generation, third generation immigrants even more nationalistic towards their homeland than before? On the other hand, you have the Indian diaspora in the US, where the US is a very assimilationist society, where there's a lot of social pressure to conform. And let's say not just the US, but the wider Anglosphere. The Anglosphere, it disguises its cultural imperialism in values and sells you this dream that if you act like them, you'll be accepted like them. And that makes a huge amount of pressure. Some people are, capable of resisting it, but many people, especially second and third generations, are fully assimilated and think, act like locals. So then they just reflect the same understanding of India that an ordinary American has, but the color of their skin makes it seem like they have more authority, or the name that they inherited from their parents makes it seem like they have more authority. So recently Biden said, "Oh, these Indian Americans are taking over. There's so many in the government." And now, your favorite, Abhivardhan, your Niti Aayog chief is like, "Oh, what a proud moment for India." How is it a
Yeah.
proud moment for India? They're US citizens serving the US government. They have one job: serve the US government. The fact that their parents or their grandparents were Indian doesn't change anything. We don't allow dual nationality. They're not Indian. Maybe by ethnicity, but not in terms of skin in the game, not in terms of interest. So that's one aspect, the assimilationist character of the Anglosphere. The other is that uh, the elite within India, because they're still mentally colonized, fall for that trap in the first place. That in other countries, so for example, Turkey had its decolonization with Ataturk, or Morocco overthrew French rule, Algeria overthrew French rule. So they developed some sort of national pride, and that is in direct opposition to the culture and political philosophy of the former colonizer. We, on the other hand, because we were granted our independence by begging, by acting more British than the British, and by petitioning them, we think there's some sort of grand common culture that, oh, because I live in Bandra and I watch Friends, I'm eligible for US passport now, or because I learned all these intricacies of Indian Supreme Court law. Now I can go to the UK and everyone will roll out the red carpet for me. This is an issue. It's an issue of, we haven't given our own people the tools with which to understand or develop pride in their own civilization. And without that, it's easy to fall for the trap of assimilationist Western values, because they're not designed for our benefit. They're designed for the host country's benefit.
Just to add to that, there is this very weird, sickening sense of acceptance that we need from the white people, that, and then we are dying to do that. And the level of inferiority complex we have, that when Biden says that, okay, this someone Indian American are taking over or they are successful there, we take this as a big moment, for a proud moment for us, because there is this mind that we are so incapable of doing that, okay, this is like a sole example which is happening, which has never happened. So this is a very, very bad sense of inferiority complex we have. Also, we have to think about it, why these people left India in the first place. Why did they leave India? Because you never provided them the opportunity to, stay there or do something. Why do people leave their country? And now you want to appropriate their success using the resources of the United States, and so they're serving American interest, and you somehow want to appropriate it. That's just not appropriate. That's not all our self-confidence when white people are concerned. We just lose it.
Yes, and then compare this to a country that I didn't mention in my first set of examples, and that's the Chinese diaspora. The Chinese diaspora in Australia. There's 1 million of them. That's almost 4% of the population. And now, there's a huge backlash from people like John Howard, the former prime minister, where they're insinuating that, all of these Chinese immigrants and diaspora, they're all secret CCP members and they're all part of a nefarious agenda. But that's, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. But China has a system where if you go abroad for studies, if you go abroad to settle, it's with the blessing of the party and with the government. So they screen you. You have to pass a certain set of values for them to send you, because you are a representative of the People's Republic and its values, and your job is to serve the nation when you're abroad. That's not something that we've tried in India. Instead, we feel proud of our brain drain that, look, Sundar Pichai this and Satya Nadella that. But did we do anything to cultivate that relationship before they left or after they left? No. And then you have the other example. So from the Cold War, I love the Cold War. I've studied the Cold War. East Germany and other Eastern Bloc countries, they had a huge problem with brain drain. That people would, be influenced by Western media, which would show, life in West Germany or in Austria, it's so wonderful. Everyone there drives a Mercedes. Everyone there lives in a big house. And it encouraged people to leave Hungary, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, and go end up being lower middle class in the West. They didn't realize that. They thought they were sold this dream. And often it was the most educated members of society who did so. So doctors and engineers. So what did these countries do? They set up an exit visa system. It wasn't enough that you got a visa to study or work abroad. You also needed to get an exit visa from your own interior ministry or from your home ministry. And then they would send bureaucrats to your house, ask you various questions, and see if you were likely to betray the country by fleeing the republic when you went abroad, or if you were seen as reliable. And also, and this was the biggest hurdle, they would say that, look, you've been educated in our socialist system. You got free healthcare for 30 years of your life. You got free schooling, free education at university. Pay us back. Do what it takes. You have to compensate us because we invested in you and we're not getting our return. So it's only fair that you pay us back for all the subsidies that we put into you that have now been wasted. Do what it is, sell your house, sell your car, doesn't matter. If you want to leave the country, this is the price you have to pay. Now, that's, quite a harsh system, but in the coming decades, I would not be surprised if it made a comeback in many countries.
That would be very intriguing to see how this goes. So, since we have been discussing about
sorry to interrupt you. We just forgot to discuss about the legendary toolkit. And before you move on,
we are going to. That's the next. I've not forgotten it. Just to put up some points. So yes, on the American part, it's very true. They have this assimilationist thing, and even I see it like whenever you go to the aspect of entertainment and so forth, they I don't know what, they confuse the idea of dharma with their own idea of pursuit of happiness, and then they try to mix it. But what happens at the end of the day is that it depends whether it works or not. So problems then start from there only, and then the dissociation begins. So definitely, I think all problems start from the home. That is also the thing, but we need to see. So let's get into this toolkit issue. Now we know what this toolkit has been. I am not going to discuss about the so-called co-conspirators and so forth, but let's understand the MEA response. Um, Ironically, even if the government responds to such things as have happened in the past, I would not have given much heed to it unless I saw the EAM responding to it, because the EAM's response was very tactical. What Minister Jaishankar tried to say was, okay, there have been some people. The way it shows is very different. So yes, the various aspects have to be taken into note. I would also point out a very interesting comment, and again, we can disagree on that or agree on that, by senior advocate Harish Salve when he was asked whether this toolkit was seditious or not. I don't have any particular views on this, but Mr. Salve said yes, it is, because of the simple reason that he gave was the language of it was very indicative and so forth. Obviously we can get on the Disha Ravi case, and then we can obviously find that the state authorities weren't able to properly prove how the PJF and all that stuff was linked properly, although yes, some aspects were there. So let's discuss this, and then maybe we can wrap up it sometime after. So anyways, anyone can start, and then we can go ahead. Yeah.
So Karthikeya, you brought it up. Go ahead.
I was a bit excited about toolkit. So yeah. So what there's a pattern which I see in the response of our government. Was it began with the CAA, and the level of misinformation which was out there was, most of the headlines are basically playing to the gallery. Inside it, it's not the same thing which the headline was giving it away. The article is different, but nobody reads the article nowadays. They just take the headline and start sharing. So that's the sensationalism international media was doing at that time. And there was this thing where we I think cancelled the visas of the international correspondents coming to India, which was, I think, very petty, and it was very stupid. Instead of resorting to that, there were many other ways to do that. We never had a press conference, a brief press conference with people, like calling all the international correspondents to Delhi, Minister Jaishankar telling them, taking their questions, answering them, putting out like a proper government side of the law. We didn't do that. And then we resorted to canceling the visa, and then we revoked it. No, we are taking it back. That just shows the policy paralysis we have in such situation. At one time, we also want to assert ourselves, and the other time we also want to like, oh, we are nice people, we are not dictatorship, we won't do that. So that's the confusion which people are seeing. They are observing that this government is confused right now, like, and in such situation they don't know what to do. And the same thing happened with like the new think tank which reduced India's democracy. They also said that we are scapegoating Muslims, and they took the example of the Tablighi Jamaat episode that happened. And I remember all PTI, all government notifications were like, do not demonize these people. We need to fight the disease, not the people. So the government had the things sorted. But still, why is the report using that to establish something exactly opposite? That tells you that we have failed. Similarly, this happened with the toolkit. This issue was festering since November. Of course, like, I'm pretty sure the farmers never wanted a solution, because we reached this point because of our stupid, myopic agricultural policies. And that this was supposed to happen sooner or later, and it happened. Now, despite that, government was also willing to make necessary amendments in the laws, and they were having these conferences. It was very clear that the farmers are not like the people who are running the protest. All protests are organized, so you should not kid that the protest is just out of the blue. No, there are people who are actually organizing it, so they don't want a resolution. It was very clear. And of course, we all know that majority of people from Punjab, they still have land here. They are living in UK or Canada, and they're sending a lot of money as foreign remittance to their people here and stuff like that. So we all know that automatically this will become a diaspora issue. Now, people who were trying to make this issue as anti-Sikh since the beginning, like when this protest was going on, since the beginning, it was clear that a certain faction of the protest is actually using the farmer cover, and at the back they have their Khalistani separatist agenda. It was very clear. Not that entire protest was based upon it, but there were people doing that. And of course, these people get all these things play to the gallery, as I am using this phrase all the time, but this is true. In the US, these things matter, that, okay, so industrialists are destroying this. So there are farmers who are, they need protection, and then we'll do that. So the conspiracy happened. This was more or less like people, using lobbying there with celebrities and stuff like that. Rihanna tweeting it. Now people were like, why can't they have opinion about it? It's a globalized world and stuff like that. Like they can comment. Of course, they can comment on it, but they don't realize that US domestic issues and Indian domestic issues are not at same par. When Indian people discuss American domestic issues, there's only a small, less influential people discussing it for their own sake. When the US does it, it actually influences a lot of things in India. For example, there was a clear pattern when you will involve a lot of foreign celebrities in such matters, automatically their government will have to take this issue. And this is the way the pressure rises from celebrities to government, and from foreign government to our government. And this is what people don't realize. I think that Disha Ravi was a pawn. She did nothing illegal. So I cannot prove that she was involved in a conspiracy. Like, to be honest, considering the evidence, I think it was very stupid to go to the court and do that, because you made your own mockery. That's it. It was very stupid. Unless you had like a proper evidence and stuff, it was not very strong to establish that she was involved in all these things. But the government did it anyway. What I feel is like she was used as a pawn, and she was very stupid. And these organizations are looking for such people in India. We all should always remember. I'm not doing the new McCarthyism here, but we all that in Jallianwala Bagh or 1857, it was not the British white soldiers shooting us; it was the Indians shooting for the British, and we should always learn from that. That it's only our people who write in NYT and Washington Post about all the shit happening in India. It was Markandeya Karju, a Supreme Court judge, going to the UK and submitting expert evidence that India is destroyed. There's no law and order and no rule of law in India now, since you have left us, so we don't know how to govern ourselves. So we should always see that this is a thing happening, and it's very important to realize that there's a problem, because then only you are going to solve it. So that is, we should look for this. Like, the government should be proactive in this, first of all, to get their theory right, and then to see that the consensus, like what they want to do, is actually trickle down to the people in India.
And then, to build on that, as Abhi said about the Ministry of External Affairs and how they responded to it, it was the first time we had seen the Ministry of External Affairs, try to hit back so hard. When they first came out with this very detailed and comprehensive release, but then they thought it was enough to just release it. They put it on their website, they put it on Twitter, and then job done. And then a day later, they're like, oh, actually, it's not enough. Let's rope in a bunch of Indian celebrities to call out foreign celebrities interfering in our sovereignty. Okay, that was new. It was refreshing. It was the first time we had seen something like that. But it's not exactly applause worthy. What it reminded me of is, you might remember when Ajit Agarkar got 6 ducks in a row. The next time he hit the ball and took a single, he raised his bat and the whole stadium gave him a standing ovation. That's what this was. That we're so used to the Ministry of External Affairs being a doormat that everyone steps on, that for the first time, they scored a run, that we're like, wow, look, we got Sachin and Kumble to tweet about it. Take that, Rihanna. Now, you can do that as a one-off. But are we going to rope in Sachin and Anil Kumble every time some sort of campaign like this comes up? No, that's not sustainable. And then it loses credibility very fast. So what we're still doing is playing on the back foot that, we were bowled a bouncer. We used to just avoid them like Deep Das Gupta. Now, maybe we blocked it like Cheteshwar Pujara. Very good. But if you keep blocking, it takes you 300 balls to make a century. What you need to do is start to score some boundaries. And to do that, you need to be proactive. That, it's not enough to just respond, once the international media has got involved or once these influencers have got involved. It's too late. They have first mover advantage, and then we look like the people come scrambling for some sort of new excuse to explain it. No, be confident and put forward your message first. It's your law. You passed it in parliament. It's at that point that you should seed this message wherever possible. But you don't have any assets. You don't have a PR company. You don't have lobbyists in the West, in their capitals. You haven't embedded any of your own assets within the media, within politics over there. In fact, the Indians who work at the New York Times are Kashmiri separatists, like the opinions editor Basharat Peer. That's the Indian who's, at the New York Times, and he's ashamed of being Indian. You ask him what his nationality is, he says, my nationality is a matter of international dispute. So these are the kind of people that we have, molding perceptions of India. How else do you think Imran Khan got to write an editorial in the New York Times where he's like, oh, I'm this great Islamic socialist, I'm building a new Medina, I'm going to build a Nordic welfare state with no money in my dysfunctional garrison state. So, when we haven't cultivated those assets, then how are we supposed to seed these messages? How are we supposed to proactively push our message forward? We'll always be defensive and reactive. We'll always be on the back foot because everyone else is playing the game. And, we're still making 36 runs in 60 overs like, in the first few World Cups.
I think the reference of cricket has made this discussion more eloquent. I think we can do it much time. I pray that some blessings go to the Indian football as well. We really wish, anyways, because I think, we never had a Jagmohan Dalmia moment for Indian football. So it's like that.
We had a Praful Patel moment instead, which
I think it needs to boost up more. I think we try to do it in Kabaddi and all that. Let's see. I still believe that we have talent, but that upping up is taking time.
I had the pleasure of meeting the whole team a couple of years ago, including Sunil Chetri. Really nice guy. Very, very pleasant.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And he said, I asked him for a photo, and he said, oh, involve the youngsters. They're the real stars. So, I got all of them with me. So, it was, very inclusive.
That sounds amazing. So, we are at the conclusion, and I think we'll just come with some thank you note and so forth. But before doing that, whosoever is watching this right now or whosoever will be watching in the future, what essence of whatever we have discussed should be given to that particular person who watches this? Like, okay, fine, we know the problems. Obviously, there is no direct solution. There are never direct solutions. It takes time. How you perpetuate it's incremental. For anyone who's an individual, for anyone who is a private actor, how should they see it? Because then what happens is, okay, fine, this information warfare will go on. There are high-end states which can handle it, but India still has to become a high-end state. We are not a high-end state right now. How should we see it? And I think with that we can conclude. I think so. Yeah.
Okay. So simply put, there's no good or evil in geopolitics. There's no left or right in geopolitics. There's no friends or enemies in geopolitics. There's only interests, and countries too weak to pursue them.
Yeah. And to build on that how you can become a strong country is like it's only the domestic solutions which are going to magnify at the international level. So in India we see that policies are considered to be the goal itself. Like the policies are considered, okay, the policies we made, now it's end. But that's the problem with us, that we don't actually think about what the goal is, how do we want to see ourselves after 5 or 10 years. And I think that's where we should start, by giving basic economic needs, meeting economic needs of the people, eradicating poverty. And after all these things, there will be a sense of dignity among the people, because a person in India, because of the overpopulation, I don't want to make overpopulation as the main scapegoat as the government uses all the time, but considering that, we don't a poor individual does not add any value to anything. Therefore, he has no dignity in India, and he has nothing. His existence is of no use. So this is where we should start, and this is also, I think, a long-term effect of colonization, that we dehumanized people who are poor, and to a certain extent that they don't count anymore. Invisible people, invisible population. So what we need to do is to bring them into the main picture, meet their necessities, make them develop them economically, have a good sense of nutrition in everybody. We should stop stunting, and the basic problems are going to work in the long term. And when we do this, then we can talk about Bharat and civilization and 5,000 years culture. Then it will make sense. Before that, it is all talk, no walk.
That's great. I'll just give a simple understanding of what we have concluded. So I think obviously on aspects of economics and development, we are at a consensus that we need to uplift the people. Oh, even on the fact that we have this civilizational narrative, I think somebody very interestingly tweeted for some time back that why we are so much fond of the Amar Chitra Katha, Mahabharata, and so forth, but we do not have that middle age culture. Like you have a Jane Austen moment, you have a Charles Dickens moment. People can argue on how they were. You have a William Shakespeare moment. You have all that part of the world where literature and music have emerged. You have Daft Punk in the US, you have Alan Walker from Norway, and all that stuff. Now, why is it that Munshi Premchand is not that much popular? I know that it seems disconnected, but it's not, because Munshi Premchand, Mahadevi Verma, all these people have been popular in the northern belt, the Hindi belt, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and so forth. Now, the Marathwada guy would not even give anything to it, and it depends, right? So the idea that you want to have a unified aspect of a civilizational heritage is obviously hard. It's not going to happen in one day, neither is going to be very happening soon. I think some aspects the government tries to show, okay. I mean, it seems very cogent. But even if private actors or individuals want to do, they need to start inculcating a positive note of things. What happens mostly that in the name, and I'm obviously in the name of whatever we say, since people say that it was a reactionary way of doing things, as the things are, they fail to get into the positive aspects of how you can build your literature, you can build your music. There is so much to do in various cultures and arts. I think that also is one aspect, along with the poverty angle and so forth. Of course, the poverty angle is there, but inculturation and nurturing that culture is also important. You can't just rely on, okay, fine, there was somebody known as Ashoka, there was somebody known as some dynasty, and somebody known as Harshvardhan. It's not like that. You need to come out of that bubble of Kalidas, and you need to think, okay, fine, we have to create something. I mean, that's the reason why, although again controversial, people unite on when it comes to sports, they might be divided on something. So I think that's the part we should end. So I think we overstretched this a bit. We thought that it would go for 90, but I think it went too long. I think that's what I think Ruchir told me initially, that discussions go on like that. Anyways, so on a very happy note, we end this. And in the next episode, I don't know what we are going to discuss, not planned anything, but whatever it will be, I think anyone would love it. And Ruchir, we would be more than happy to have you, in our upcoming discussions. I think we can have more perspectives, and same to Karthik. I think we can do that, and let us see how this develops. I hope the first episode has been fine, and we thank all the viewers who have been watching us, and also to those who will watch late, like a binge watch. Not a problem. Thank you so much. Subscribe to Internationalism Global Podcasts on YouTube, as well as follow us on Anchor, Spotify, and other platforms for podcasts from Google News and so forth. And see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.